G'day, expats. Welcome to another episode of Expat Chat, episode 70 today. And as always, joined with my mate, colleague, business partner, and of course, mentor, Brett Evans, who is the managing director for the EMEA region. How are you going, Brett?
You also forgot fellow fisherman and a couple of the titles there, but yeah, we're never going. So, mate, all well here, thanks. Got very excited on the way into work this morning. Yeah, the temperatures are dropping, so it's party time. We had a big storm go through the DIFC 2 days ago, which
Gosh,
is nice. It's funny how
shocking that it rains over there.
look at you forget how it does rain.
Yeah,
And I'm sitting here working away in the office and. I heard this on the window. What the hell was that? It sounded like someone tapping on the window.
yep.
And turn around, it's rain. It's like, so the whole building empties and runs out to see the rain. That's
Just
how
to
big
see
the
it.
event was. Yeah. So we haven't seen
I mean,
rain for about six to 8 months. So it's just nice to
no, it'd be a
nice to be
nice
part of.
time. The fact that it's getting cooler and it's been obviously I'd say it's been actually it'd be actually getting busier in Dubai, I would think, because of the World Cup. Is that right?
It's nuts. It is
Yeah,
absolutely bursting at the seams right now. It is absolutely
and
bursting at
the
the seams.
and the F1's in the past now as well. That would
Yeah,
have been
F1 was on the
pretty
weekend.
crazy.
Yeah,
That's it.
F1, and I think there'll be a lot of people who came for the F1 and now going to the World Cup. Yeah, they'll sort of do
Yep.
back ending it, so they'll base themselves out of the UAE, and I think there's like 80 shuttle flights going between UAE and Doha every day. So
It,
it's all happening in the sandpit.
yeah, it definitely is. Yeah. You hear strange reports of everything going over in Qatar right now with the World Cup, but gosh, it just means that whole area is just obviously exploded with tourists, just as this pretty much month-long event just kicks off.
Yeah, exactly right. And to those who are new to the podcast, the other voice that you can hear, apart from myself, is my mate, colleague, business partner, and the guru for the APAC region, James Ridley. So James runs the Australian office and looks after clients in the Asia and Middle Asia. Start again, Asia and the Americas region. So there we
Hey,
go.
I can try and look after the Middle East, but that's not my area. That's not my
No,
specialty anymore.
it's easy, heavy. You just got to learn a bit of Arabic, and yeah, it's all good.
That's it,
Just
mate.
the
And
word you want to say out time and time again is inshallah. Just say everything's
yeah,
inshallah. Yeah, can I have this?
that's it.
Inshallah.
I I had a call with a guy the other day, and he sort of said that as we joked about sort of tax and residency and a few other things, and I was like, oh, that's actually a good segue probably into what we'll talk about today. But I guess this year's just gone so quickly now, hasn't it? And I mean, I was looking at how sort of share markets have sort of tracked even just the last week or two, and I just feel like things are starting to settle a bit. There's a bit of even we've seen some interesting lifts as well. You see, recently the currency, the Australian dollar, is gaining a little
Yep.
bit on the US dollar.
It jumped from like 62 to 67 at a rate of knots. It was very quickly to see. And
Yeah.
to those who, I can't remember which episode it was, about 65, and we're talking about the FX rate, and it
Oh,
was sitting
yeah.
at 62. And I do believe, and I can say this with hand on heart, that both of us said, if you like 62, transfer it now. So to all those
Oh,
who did transfer funds back to Oz, well done.
well done.
To all
Well done.
those sitting on the sidelines pontificating and picking lint out of
Kicking
their navels,
themselves.
and you should kick yourself, give yourself a good uppercut,
Yep.
because like we've seen time and time again, we don't see a flag get waved when it's good or bad.
Mm,
If
mm.
you like it, you do it. Same with equity
Yep.
prices, same with property prices, same with currency. If that asset is appealing at that price at that time, don't try
Mm.
and be a guru, because
Nope.
you won't know whether it's a good or bad price until after the fact. And more than likely, if there is a bit of consternation going on, it's a good price.
That's it. And I mean, yeah, it's very rare that you hear someone that can outsmart the market. People have been doing it for 50 years and they still get it wrong. And you look at all the chief economists that were talking about interest rates and everything as we entered COVID, and look at sort of even Governor Lowe thought we weren't going to touch interest rates until 2024, 2025. Look at
Yeah,
where
that
we've been
that that
now.
is that
So,
is that is not going to age well, is it? That's going to haunt him for the rest
uh,
of his career.
I, I'm sure there'll be some good studies conducted on that in probably 10 or 15 years, some good papers written on about
They're
what he
doing it
did
right
right and
now.
what he did wrong.
They're
Yeah,
doing it right
yeah, yeah.
now. So they've
Well, they're
got the
doing a
Reserve Bank
review on
review.
the
Yeah,
RBA. That's right. Yeah,
yeah.
yep, yep. So
So which I
it'll
think is
be,
just yeah, it's definitely justified, definitely warranted, because to me, there's a lot of folks out there who took him at his face value that don't have the ability or the knowledge or the understanding to see past what he was saying and read the tea leaves in the market, because blind Freddie could see that interest rates were going up, inflation was going through the roof. It wasn't transitory like they were saying. It was endemic. It was baked into the system.
That's it. And when you've got China right now, China's still grappling with that wave over there of COVID, and because they haven't really moved to, or as I like to say, the ways of the West,
Yeah,
and just kicked on with it. They are the factory to the rest of the world, and as long as they're sort of still in a bit of a holding pattern with dealing with COVID in their own way, things aren't going to return to sort of the normal from a growth perspective, GDP growth, all those sort of things, because we're always going to be waiting for China to hurry up and reopen. So kickstarts the factory and the rest of the world gets flooded with the supply side. So, yep, it's definitely, inflation will curb down, but not overnight. It'll still take another, I'd say, 2 years. But I think what we've seen in recent weeks with the currency, one, commodity prices have risen on the Australian side, so that helps us naturally. But I also think it's this renewed confidence as we finish off the year where
it's risk on.
everything is known. That's it. It's risk on. Everything is known. Means investors are pulling money out of the trade currency or the safe haven appeal currency and either putting it into other markets, whether it's a currency market or share markets, property to a degree. So risk on approach, which is good. It's good for obviously markets switching back on, because I think we're now at the tail end of this interest rate rising cycle. And we honestly can only have a few more months back in Australia. I think right now, maybe 4 months. We've got to remember that the RBA doesn't meet in January. They meet in December and then they meet again in February. So right now, it's really hard trying to decide, okay, will they go 0.25 or are they going to try and get ahead of the curve and maybe go 0.5 knowing that they're missing a month there, or are they going to just wait? So very interesting seeing what comes of that. We know FOMC meeting, when they meet, we might get another 0.5, maybe 0.75, but there's I'd say there's less argument for a 0.75 now. But it just means now that we're reaching that end, markets being forward pricing, it won't take much for them to lift aggressively once they get that sort of glimpse of good news. And we saw that silver lining probably only 4 weeks ago when the Nasdaq or the S&P 500 turned a rocket on and rose about 5% in one day. But obviously had some little shuffle backwards after that. But that's pretty standard. That's just showing you how supercharged markets are right now for that good news.
Exactly, mate. So I think we bring it back to our segue you had before. Let's talk about tax residency in the UAE for Australian expats.
Does it exist? Yeah, of course it does.
Technically, yes, no, yeah.
I mean, you guys don't pay
Inshallah.
tax. Come on, you pay knowledge fees or levies or whatever you want to call it. I know there's hidden
the
taxes.
Dubai tax. The Dubai tax.
Yeah, that's it. But I mean, a really good item to talk about. And I mean, do we need the legal disclaimer? You tell me, Brett.
Always, mate.
About tax residency in the UAE.
We love the disclaimers. So all the information you're about to have the privilege and pleasure of listening to today, or watching if you're watching on YouTube, should be construed as should not be construed as personal advice. Should be construed as general advice. And if you do need to get personal advice, make sure you reach out to us.
Have to give everyone personal advice that listens in. All those millions of people, millions of people dialing in today and listening in. But I mean, it's really interesting that residency rules, they're updated a little bit in the UAE, and I guess they've probably put pen to paper on something that's a little bit more formal, because previously there wasn't anything which sort of, that's right, nothing really governed you. And I guess the fact that nothing governed your residency technically in the UAE, I could see that as a key risk. We know the UAE does not have a DTA with Australia. So the fact that they're bringing in some residency rules there, this is super encouraging, because if you're ever in a grey area, but you qualify under the residency rules in the UAE, under their new rules, it's really good in terms of if you have to go through the process of the ATO challenging a residency or a private ruling. But let's deep dive into it a little bit more. Because right now it's a bit of not a grey area, but just there's not much that needs to be ticked off on the UAE side.
No, so I mean, obviously, when you leave Australia, you need to dequalify as a resident of Australia for tax purposes, and then for most other countries where you go, there'll be like some sort of substantial presence test and a test to show that yes, you are a tax resident in that country. Up until now, and for the history of the UAE, there's never been any legislation. So essentially the way it's always worked in the past is that to be a classified as a tax resident, and to get what they call a TRC, a tax resident certificate, you had to spend more than 180 days in the UAE and have what we call an Ejari. An Ejari is an Arabic word for a contract, I think. For those out there who know their Arabic, apologies if I screwed that up. But I think an Ejari means a contract, which means that you have a lease agreement, to permanently reside in the country. Now, where it's going is very different. And there's a couple of frameworks that overlap on top of this. But essentially what they're doing is on the 1st of March 2023, new laws will come in that will actually quantify and qualify what you have to do or be to be a tax resident of the UAE. And they've talked about two different types of categories. There's the legal person, and then there's a natural person. So a legal person is actually an entity, so like a company, and then a natural person is obviously an individual. So what it does now, there's actually a qualification process that now, more like a framework that, Australian expats in the UAE can hang their hat on to say that, okay, legislatively, I am a tax resident of the UAE. Now, that doesn't mean you can't be a tax resident of Australia under certain conditions, but it just gives you a bit more peace of mind when it comes to, where your legal tax residency is. So
and I mean, pausing it there. Tax is a funny thing when they talk about tax residency rules, because obviously you don't pay tax, but we know that and I'm wondering whether they're doing this because in the future they're trying to establish a framework for taxing rights in the future when things firm up, where maybe the
100%
UAE
guaranteed
introduces some sort of personal income tax rates. I don't think they're going to be much, but I just think where the fact that they sort of bring in this kind of framework and then maybe a year or 2 or 3 years later go, hey, we're going to bring in a 3% income tax across, across any income that you source within the UAE or, and I just think that's probably the beginning, because often countries that have low income tax rates, this is sort of where they start at. They bring in a framework that governs residency and taxing rights, and then it's not too long after where they start to introduce personal income tax rates and I suppose corporate tax rates. Corporate tax rates technically already exist in the UAE, VAT and those sort of things. But I just wonder if this is sort of the beginning of the snowball at the top of the mountain where, okay, it's going to start off the size of a tennis ball and we're just going to slowly introduce things. It's not going to be anything punitive. It's still going to probably be one of the lowest, if not the lowest taxed environments in the world in 10 years' time. But this, to me, smells like it could be the beginning.
Look, it is. And if you look at, the battles that the UAE has been going through with respect to FATF and being on the grey list, and those in the game will understand what I'm talking about there. The UAE wants them to be seen to be, compliant on Western standards when it comes to taxing, money laundering, terrorism, financing, those sort of things. Yeah, exactly. So, and they've done a lot in the last 12 months. We're now working Monday to Friday, which lines up with most of the world when it comes to working days. We do have a company tax coming in next year, and that company tax essentially is on any profits greater than, it's either 325 or 375,000 dirhams a year. But the funny thing is you can actually earn a big income and not pay tax at all. So, but it's the start. You can see it's like a big piece of open ground. And then one building goes in, the next building goes in, the next building goes in, and then suddenly you got a whole suburb, that fills itself in.
Yeah, well, I mean, if they're going to start generating corporate tax to a degree, and then at some point personal income tax, and what I'm getting at here with this point is, which I haven't really explained too well, is you look at how quickly Dubai has grown, the UAE, in the last 50 years. It's remarkable when you see those images.
Nuts.
What's the introduction of some income tax going to do to the infrastructure into the public sector? Just going to put this thing on, exponential growth. Or that's right. It's going to be remarkable what would happen to it, say, over the next 50 years if they just subtly introduce some rates. I don't think the rates will discourage many businesses already entering the UAE and people living over there, but you could see obviously a big growth from, obviously you look at Dubai, it's along the coast, but now you could start to see it go out back and west or into the actual desert a lot more. And it'd be very interesting to see what happens there and how the public sector uses that tax revenue.
to me, the company tax is a positive, and that's me saying this as a business owner with a company here. And the reason being is we don't pay company tax at the moment, but we pay a company license fee, and that license fee we pay every year to renew our company license. Our fee is exactly the same as Citigroup, Morgan Stanley, Deutsche Bank. So there's no portion of the size. And by going down the company tax route, what it means is you will pay based on the size of your company. You know, if you're a MNC, big ass company, but making lots of profits, then guess what? You know, you'll pay more fees than say someone like us that is smaller and will pay less. So it's more fair, I guess you could say, in that regard. If they do bring in a personal tax, then they would have to get rid of a lot of fees and charges that we pay both systematically and on an ad hoc basis, you know, like you mentioned before, knowledge fees, municipality fees, all sorts of stuff. So it'll be a long drawn out process as they wean themselves off these fixed fees and start going towards an income tax fee. But, you know, to me, the framework is there. I said, you can see it starting to, these pieces are just sort of dropping in one by one. And, done right, you know, we look at Singapore, you know, 15% tax, no CGT, Singapore's booming. So it's not to say bringing in a tax will be a negative as long as they fix up this other side of it. Then we're not paying lots of fees and charges that we do on the other side. So it's going to be an interesting one to see. And knowing the UAE, we'll get 3 weeks notice and they'll just suddenly say, this is what's going on and off we go from there. But mate, let's run through what Article 4 of this resolution defines natural persons as a tax resident of the UAE. And essentially it's if one of the following conditions is met. So the individual's usual or principal place of residence is in the UAE and the centre of their financial and personal interests are in the UAE, or other conditions prescribed by the minister, which we don't want to know those conditions yet, or the individual has been physically present in the UAE for a period of 183 days or more in a 12-month period, or the individual has been physically present in the UAE for a period of 90 days or more over a 12-month period and is a UAE citizen, a resident, or a GCC national who either has permanent place of residence in the UAE or carries out a job or business in the UAE. So essentially, most people would, you know, fit into all three. But for those who do spend a lot of time on the road, there's a lot of people who travel here for work. You know, they don't have to be here for 183 days. And I think that's why they put that third categorization there with the 90 days, because there's a lot of, like, I know people who that you hear on weekends and, you know, weekdays, they're on a plane. So, you know, to me, they've looked at the market and looked at the dynamics and the demographics and said, well, rightio, we are a hub for this, you know, this region, and a lot of people travel. There's a lot of folks who are fly in, fly out with Saudi, you know, even though Saudi's gone through massive leaps when it comes to where they were 5 years ago, where they are now. There is still a bit of a hesitation for families to live there. So quite often the families will live in the UAE and the husband will fly back and forth between Saudi and the UAE. But, you know, that'll change over time. So to me, look, it's just one of those things that, you know, if you, and now that we live in a global data-driven tax compliant framework, with now, you can actually request a tax residence certificate from the FTA, the Federal Tax Authority, to say, okay, here's my proof that I've been in the country for this long. Give me a certificate. Give me a legal certificate that says I'm a tax resident here. Now, at the moment, it really only helps those who are citizens of a country with a DTA with another country. So that's one of the reasons why they're bringing this law in. So believe it or not, the UAE does have a lot of DTAs with a lot of countries. UK including one of those, I think. You know, when I've spoken to government officials in the past, Australia at the moment is not too keen to have a DTA with the UAE, but they are doing SEPAs and free trade agreement negotiations as we speak right now. So it's a step towards that. More binding relationships and you know, and frameworks. But to me, it's just gives you a bit of an insight into what's coming down the track. But you know, certainly from an Australian expat's point of view who lives in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Ras Al Khaimah, Fujairah, you know, Sharjah, Ajman, Claim, and there was one more. It just means that they've actually got a certificate, a government certificate to say that, yes, you are a tax resident of this country, which is just another thing you want to add to your compendium of documents that solidify your position being a non-tax resident of Australia.
That's it. And I mean, there's some common themes in that article. For the 90 days, it would be great if our new proposed rules, rather than 45 days, was 90 days. And the 183, the 183 days is probably the most common residency theme across a lot of countries, because it's obviously just over half, or half a year, 6 months, or just over 1 day. So it makes sense that they're absorbing very similar types of rules around, I suppose. One of them is technically the Australian rule, but it's a secondary rule right now. If you look at the US substantial presence test, that's one of the most significant rules around residency, but they encompass several years as well. You look at the UK, Singapore as well. So they're sort of in line with a lot of big countries or big economies that are on the forefront. So it does make sense. There's no real surprise there, and I agree. It creates more clarity for expats in the UAE, and especially if there's any grey area around their residency. Hey, got this tax residency certificate. Don't nearly worry too much anymore about whether I'm falling into a grey category. But as always, every government seems to change the goalpost, but this seems to be obviously providing further clarity to a lot of expats in the UAE, which is good news. It's good news.
I think it is. I think it's it's a step in the right direction. It takes out that grey space. One of the reasons why they are doing the review of the Australian tax residency rules is because it's very subjective, very, sort of maybe, yes and no's, black and white is what we like, because we can play on that basis. So to me, that's a positive. I don't think people should panic. I don't think it reduces the appeal of the UAE to a lot of folks when it comes to coming here to work and live. In actual fact, it might actually improve it. Who knows? I mean, especially those folks who've lived in the UAE for many, many years, and I'm talking the 90s and the 80s, they look at it now and think, God, you got nothing to worry about compared to what we had to go through to get a driver's license back in the 80s. You talk to these people and just, it's fascinating. I can listen to them for hours. So to me, this is a step in the right direction. It is a step, it's a sign of the UAE stepping up in the world when it comes to having this global framework that FATF and all these other organisations, the OECD, do work upon when it comes to, corporate governance and sovereignty governance and those sort of things. So I think it's good. I think people should panic, and, we'll certainly keep people, up to breast and informed as this further develops.
Absolutely, man. I think that's probably a good point to finish off today's episode. So, I mean, watch this space as the UAE, I suppose, rolls out its first tax residency rules, which again, it's designed to probably provide further clarity to individual expat situation there. And ideally, you can use it, as a source of proof when you're challenging or getting challenged by your respective taxation authority. Ideally, it's, the ATO, but if you're from another country, whether it's the HMRC or the IRS, as an example. So very careful.
Exactly, mate. So I think we'll wrap it up there. Thanks to the folks for joining us on another episode, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Sounds good, mate. As always, thanks for your time.
Thanks, mate. Take care.